extensively researching and teaching on the topics of terrorist motivation, radicalization, and the psychology of terrorism. He is currently an investigator with the National Center of the Study of Terrorism, and that's better known as START. And he's been talking to the United Nations, to the U.S., well, the CIA, Department of Homeland Security. And so tell me, just weigh in on your thoughts about General Petraeus, because my first feeling was, why would this man have to retire or resign because of an affair? I don't think that's a national security issue, is it? But maybe not. There's more information, right?
Well, I think it still remains to be seen. You know, frankly, we're still kind of seeing some of the details emerge. And one of the things that, you know, I keep in mind with this sort of event, I mean, first of all, my heart goes out to the families here in the sense that this really is, you know, a huge disruption to them. But I think in terms of the security issue, you know, the perception is that it could be. Now, I think the FBI investigation, from what I'm kind of seeing in various news sources, is saying that, look, this doesn't seem like it was a real security threat. There weren't, you know, classified bits of information that were being improperly disclosed, things like that. So I think that is starting to come out, that wasn't where the real concern was. But I think the bigger concern is, and especially with regard to work in the intelligence community, is that, you know, it's very important to exercise and exhibit, you know, very good, prudent, sound judgment, and to not get yourself into situations where you could be compromised, where, you know, someone could hold something over you. And so that's a huge issue that comes up in doing this kind of work, and that's why people, you know, there's full lifestyle polygraphs, things that really get people to have the kinds of clearances, just to make sure that there is not information out there that could be used against them to harass, extort, blackmail, or otherwise compromise. And I think that's where it comes in, because Petraeus, based on his statements, you know, said, look, I can't sit at the top here and have everyone else, you know, have to live to a standard that I failed to live to. At least that's how I'm interpreting it from what I've seen so far.
Now, it looks like the scandal is widening because General Allen, I believe it is, was now been caught up in a further piece of the scandal, which is the woman that was receiving the harassing emails, Jill Kelly. Apparently had sent over 30,000 emails to General Allen. And so it just seems to get bigger and bigger. And then the other piece that I read late last night after we've been chatting on Facebook is now Paula Broadbent spoke to University of Denver audience and said some details about what happened in Benghazi that most of us hadn't been aware of. So then the next question is, did she know that before anybody else did, and was that classified information? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and that's a great question, I think, and that is where this story, if there is some traction to be gained, it's stuff like that that's going to piece it together. Now, from what I'm seeing in the reporting, it looks like, you know, the agency came out and said, look, what she said isn't actually the case, and so we're not quite sure where she was getting that from. But, you know, again, that's the kind of thing that I think in the course of a full and proper investigation will certainly come out, because if indeed there was this kind of level of disclosure that really was not above board, you know, that's a different story. Then that goes just beyond a marital infidelity and an affair and discretion and so on. It really takes it into a different level. But at this point, it doesn't really appear substantively, outside of that one example of the speech that you referred to, that there's more to that story. But again, I think it's so early in this investigation that it remains to be seen.
Although it seems that with this scandal widening, with General Allen being caught up in it as well, what are the implications on that level? Is there something else that we should be thinking about? Is something happening within the chain of command that somehow or another sort of a moral code is breaking down?
I don't know that I would go that far. I think that this is really, you know, it's kind of yet another in just an unfortunate and really, you know, frankly, to me, upsetting kind of string of these sorts of just, you know, events where people are having extramarital affairs and think that, you know, that they are going to be able to get away with it, that somehow the rules don't necessarily apply, or that the oaths they took or that the word they gave doesn't necessarily count, you know, in this particular context, or whatever the reason is. I think there's enough instances of it that, you know, some of the questions about why do people in positions of power seem to do this, I think there's again, I think it's a little premature to kind of say that there's a breakdown beyond that.
Well, just for listeners, I will be speaking with John Gottman in the next section, and John Gottman has done a lot of work. He's one of the preeminent therapists and psychologists who's been studying infidelity and marriages for over 40 years, so we'll have some more information about that. But Tony, you're a psychologist as well, and what's your take on this? Does power give these gentlemen, it seems to be men, sorry, I'm a woman, but does it seem to give them this feeling of the rules don't apply to me, not now?
Well, I would say that, there are, in all of these cases, women involved too, and married women at that.
Yes.
In this particular case. And I think that there probably is some degree of that. It's like the rules may apply, but maybe differently. I'm not quite sure about the kind of moral reasoning and the kind of explaining away that would go beyond that. But I do think, as a social psychologist, that there's a huge power of the situation, and a situation where people are working closely together, where they're kind of removed from the rest of their kind of normal life and relationships. I mean, I think there's a real power there that can facilitate behavior that wouldn't necessarily be even in the consideration set, back here in the U.S. or back living in your own town or whatever. I think there's a tremendous power of that kind of environment situation that we all need to be cognizant of as well.
Well, it's really interesting, and it feels unprecedented. Has anything like this happened in the past that you would have known of? I can't think I've heard of anything quite this stunning.
Well, I mean, maybe not in this particular context. And I think, look, there are definitely examples when you're talking about intelligence and lapses and disclosure, and, there's certainly cases, the exceptional instances where this kind of thing, can happen, where people are, spying or giving away secrets or leaking classified information. I think that, there are some instances like that. In this instance is a little bit different because I think it was somebody who was perceived as so squeaky clean, as so upright and morally upstanding, and just a man of huge integrity. So I think that perception, which General Petraeus really worked long and hard to build up, I think that in that instance, coupled with the fact that it's someone who sits at the top of this organization that is really known for having this kind of integrity and being able to really, be guided by a stronger moral compass. I think that's what makes this more remarkable, but I don't perceive it as, so exceptional.
Right. One of the things that really leaped out at me is the timing of all this. We only have a couple minutes left, but just a few thoughts on how would this have affected the election if this had come out just a few days earlier? It seems very odd to me that this would come out the day after the election.
Well, that is, I think that those are always the questions we can ask. I mean, the truth of the matter is, Petraeus had been, very long-standing, in the military. His career had been remarkable over a long period of time, over many administrations. I think that certainly a lot of political hay would have been made of this, but I think that would be very inappropriate. What I do think is going to be interesting is the fact that now people in the intelligence supervisory roles, people on subcommittees and such, are saying, hey, wait a minute, why didn't we know about this?
Right.
And that's where it's going to get interesting. Why wasn't this information that there was an investigation here coming to us earlier? And you're starting to see that, come to light.
All right, one last really quick question. Put your terrorist hat on. How would you perceive this, and how would you spin it if you were kind of looking at it, wanting to leverage this in your community, and how would that affect us?
Well, I'm not sure that it would. I think it would just be yet another example of, they say one thing and they do something different, and that's part of the kind of propaganda. But I don't know that this will connect particularly